Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This is going to be me continuing my rewatch of the series ahead of the release of Season 4, Book 4, which is coming in, just under 2 weeks now. So we're going to be going back over Book 2, Sky here. So we get basically episodes 10 to 18 of the series, with just one more season to go ahead of season 4, of course. So this one is definitely for me an improvement over the first season. A bunch of little things I think come together to just make that the correct view on this. They fixed the animation, they responded to fan feedback. That was a good thing to show that you were willing to do. Listen to fans when there was an obvious complaint. They did that, and for the most part animation seems like a big step up from the first season. Other than that, I would say the main thing with the kind of plot character structure that just makes this work a little bit better is that season 1 was very much like our main group, you know, Callum, Ezran, Rayla, and then Viren was doing interesting stuff in the background. We still get that dynamic here, except we also now have Claudia and Soren a little bit more in the plot, whereas they only had a few scattered scenes because that plot had to be taken quite slowly, where they just barely caught up at the end. Here, they're a major focus, and just like Viren, that whole family is where you really get the sort of nuanced characters from, in that they're positioned as being sort of, you know, like antagonists, you know, villains to a certain degree. But you know they're not, because they do have like a close relationship to Callum and Ezran. So you're wondering, okay, they're following their father's orders, but they definitely have doubts about them. For different reasons, of course, because Soren, of course, was told to basically take out the princes, you know, have them killed in accidents. And then Claudia was told to prioritize the egg, or Zim, over her brother. So both kind of quite extreme kind of views here. And as we see in kind of throughout all of this, you see that they are both aren't willing to quite go that far. But there's still elements of, like, Soren was basically planning to make it happen, and if not for just a sudden change in the way they were doing the plan, he might have actually done that. Claudia, we see, actually chooses to effectively, you know, prioritize caring for her brother over just directly kind of going after the egg. The way the scene is played out, like, of course, it's very much the obvious thing to do, but it shows how much she cares for her brother, and is very much meant to represent that. Unlike Viren, who seems to be able to put a lot of that stuff aside, she can't quite do that, but she still has aspects of her father to her, like when she has this really nice moment at the end of the season with Ezran, but then she sort of kind of lies by omission, sort of manipulates him to guide her to this fruit, but it's just a way to get her near those animals, which she's going to use dark magic on to heal Soren. So it's the kind of extreme lengths that she will go through to make this happen, which is very much what they're doing with Viren in both the flashbacks, which address part of the fractured relationship between Harrow and Viren in the first season, and just in general the way Viren is right now. And we see just how, like, kind of pragmatic he is. That's I think the words he uses to, like, describe himself. And it is correct in that he's, at least as of this point, like 2 seasons in, you feel like he only probably just becomes a proper villain right at the end, when he actually goes through with the whole Aravos thing right at the end. Up until that point, he's doing in a way what needs to be done, and you can get why, especially because he's not entirely wrong in a lot of these situations where, okay, he does want to solve a lot of things with dark magic, but it's all to ultimately help the people close to him, help the kingdom, And sure, it's showing a little bit of lack of care for anything in Zadia. But the argument that's sort of made in all of this is that effectively, you know, we are going to prioritize the lives of these people over effectively just, I suppose, some animals effectively. But we'll get into the flashback, I suppose, a little bit more later on. But I think the big thing with Viren is definitely that when he has the meeting of the Pentarchy and he meets all the other leaders, you can see that they're ultimately willing to go along with him, and that the other kingdoms don't really have particularly strong rulers, and it's actually Queen Anya who's the only one who actually is willing to speak up despite being the youngest. And he even thinks that he kind of gets her onto his side with the story which involves her mother's. And he gets so frustrated when Anya kind of takes from that the idea to not sacrifice so many people, which being involved in a war probably would. But you also get why Viren is frustrated by that he seems to be the only one who kind of cares that Zadia is attacking, and why are we the only ones who are actually doing anything in all of this? In that the others, as is pointed out, all just make the decision of like, if everyone else agrees, we'll agree too. So that's kind of part of the situation there. And it's really only when that happens, when he fully commits to, I guess I'll take a risk on Aravos, like what's going on in this mirror, this like, you know, magical kind of spell that I'm being thought. And obviously sending out the kind of magical assassins to each of the kingdoms to get them on his side is clearly the the most villainous kind of act that he actually does. Along with the idea of, you know, defending himself with magic and like killing people as he's being arrested for basically kind of treason, kind of manipulation type stuff. You can see it's a bit of a fall, and he hits this really low point at the end. But Aravos sort of assures him that, no, I'll be with you, you know, things will go good from here. And that's something that surprised me with going back to season 1 again, was that, oh yeah, Aravos isn't really like referenced much in season 1. They just about bring the mirror into play, which brings Aravos into play. This is the season where they start to actually say stuff about Aravos. And I'd almost forgotten completely the whole idea of like, oh yeah, the cube is called the Key of Aravos, and it's actually Harrow in the letter who I think is the first one to mention Aravos, and that this thing will unlock something in Zadia. So that's important to remember going into these upcoming seasons, is that that thing is called a key. And I suppose the reason it's connected to all the primal sources is because Aravos has that connection as well. So that's interesting. Can you make any more connection about the fact that it seems to be something that is heavily referenced in Callum's kind of fever dream at the end, as he's being teased with the idea of effectively make the choice, go fully down the dark magic path or establish a connection to an arcanum for like the first time. And it's interesting that the kind of evil Callum is holding the cube and all the runes are the same. And then when he it kind of goes away as he kind of connects to the Sky Arcanum. It's very interesting to see where they go, because I felt, based on the end of this season, that the direction they would go in from here would be that, oh, Callum is just going to learn each of the magic's arcanums like one by one. But interestingly, I suppose going into season 4, as far as we're aware, he still only has the Sky Arcanum. Now, he should be theoretically close to the Moon Arcanum, and maybe whatever way they do season 4 with the reunion with Rayla, that might be something that makes that happen. Otherwise, like, I don't think he's really had much of an interaction with any of the other magics, like, full stop. So I still feel we're leaning in that direction, where either Callum will have at least a couple of them himself, or just it'll be like him plus a few characters around him who ultimately make up like all of the different arcanums that is just going to be needed with the cube to unlock whatever thing they need to unlock. But just the simplicity of like, yeah, I forgot that Aravos doesn't really properly come into play until late season 2, because you think like he's been around so long. It just speaks to how memorable the character is that he only actually speaks in like what, 2-3 episodes from the end, or something like that. With the whole Viren Aravos thing, I suppose the most interesting point is that when he tells him his name, Viren goes to look him up, but then all the information goes away. But then the same thing doesn't happen with Callum reading. The same thing doesn't happen with Callum reading the letter from Harrow. So clearly this is an effect that Aravos has on people, where like he can choose to have this kind of thing happen where knowledge of him fades away from the world. So I'm guessing we'll maybe get some of that. I forget, do they do anything with this in season 3? That's why I need to rewatch it, of course. But I'm guessing they'll do something like that as they begin to bring Aravos more heavily into play. As for the earlier episodes, again, the whole when Claudia and Soren come into play, I like a lot of what's going on here, because obviously it's Claudia and Soren like hiding their true motivations, coming across as friends when they actually have this kind of darker kind of motive in all of it. But I like that, at least early on, it's more Soren is the one actively scheming and lying. Not well, but doing that. Whereas Claudia, there's an element of she's acting this way to manipulate to a certain degree, but she is just sort of like honest with what happens here. And you can see the relationship between her and Callum, and it's actually quite well done. But you see this slight disconnect over stuff like their opinions on, say, like dark magic. I think Callum is a little taken aback by how he's gained a little bit of an awareness of like the flaws of dark magic and the positives of like the true forms of magic. And so seeing Claudia so kind of just blatantly be like, yeah, this is the way we do things all the time, it's a little bit of a surprise there. But then the plot point again, and I forget how long that this plot point goes on as well, was the truth becoming aware to people that Harrow is dead. That they deal with it here, but then Ezran only finds out about it in like the last episode or 2 of this season. So it's a lot of those things where like, oh, this plot point that you think gets resolved in season 1 actually no, is the core plot in a way of like the first sort of 3-ish episodes, and then comes back again at the end with Ezran finding out. So I liked how they did it in that they prevented it from just being the simple I'm annoyed because you didn't tell me. They lean into that a little bit, but then I like the whole idea of Callum couldn't tell Ezran, so he understands why Rayla couldn't tell him. And so at the end, Ezran finding out from Corvus, basically, it's a kind of surprising moment for Ezran, but it allows him to go on that arc where he basically comes to realize that, okay, this is the truth, this is what's happened. I am now to be king. As much as I want to stay on this mission, I have to go and claim that title. And I like it from like a very young character. Again, they're leaning into this idea that don't just dismiss Ezran as a character because he's quite young. You see some of the depth come out here in this decision that he makes, and that he's the one with the deep connection to Zim, but he's also the one to actually leave the group to go elsewhere. Now, they do establish this sort of little bit of a telepathic kind of communication between him and Zim, which is quite nice, as they do bookmark the season with the whole idea of Zim flying, the training that is needed, and then Zim flying helping them actually get into Zadia. But on that plot, on the kind of journey aspect, it is very interesting to see that it is relatively like minimal progress. Like we literally just go from being in sort of like the Catalyst castle to just entering Zadia here. And obviously Zadia is where a lot of the truly interesting aspects of the Dragon Prince come out. And it speaks to like how much they've held off on going too big with the magical stuff so far, in that we get introduced to some kind of Sunfire elves here. But otherwise, we've only really met the Moon and Sun elves for the most part. So, and then one Star elf, of course. So, it speaks to like even going into season 4 and the whole tease of Earth. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to get to see kind of Earth for the first time. And I get it through concept stuff. I think we've seen bits and pieces of kind of some of the other ones that we don't know too much about. But in the show, there's still quite a lot to show. And that's the whole appeal, I suppose, of the idea of we have 4 more books left. And there is quite a bit still to explore. So that's all good. I suppose I mentioned it before, but I suppose Callum connecting to the Sky Arcanum, more specifically, an interesting point, because like I said, it's this kind of big character defining moment of like, apparently Callum is the first human to ever make this connection. And the question is obviously like, is it something special about Callum? Because if it isn't, then why haven't any other humans ever been able to make this connection before? So is it because they have the key with them that this is allowed to happen, and there is actually a significance there, that the key actually, the cube actually allows this to happen? And it was Callum making this decision of primal magic over dark magic that facilitated it. Is there something special about him? Again, the whole idea of like his actual father is dead. Who was he? Because Harrow seems to think that there is some potential in Callum for something. So what is that? I think a lot is going to depend on how they do sort of Callum with, say, a second Arcanum and the specifics of what happens. Because if the cube gets referenced again, is it always in relation to, say, like dark magic? Because it looks like Callum is going to have another dark magic moment in like season 4. So is that what we're leading towards? That maybe in these moments where he does dark magic, he basically has a decision to make, and that does open a magical pathway effectively to an Arcanum. Maybe we'll see what happens there. But it's nice, like the reference of like having a little bit of a moment with his father, but then it being the mother who's like the final kind of stage of it to kind of help him through. It is quite well done ultimately, so that was, I think, pretty strong. And yeah, he just has the Arcanum now. And again, the idea here is that it just means he can use basic spells, but he still needs there to effectively be a storm or something else that will help to amplify his magic to be able to do the really kind of like big stuff. That will be interesting to see how they kind of use going forward, and that like, will he have to get a primal stone again, or something like that. We'll see. Next, I suppose, the flashback. Really, really important, because of course they referenced this in season 1, and there's definitely a need to go over it here of like, okay, what incidents led up to Harrow being assassinated, basically? And so we get what started this off is just things going bad in Durin. The queens come to Catalyst to ask for aid. It is given to them, but that's going to mean that now 2 of the kingdoms are actually in trouble. That Catalyst could just barely fend for itself, and now it's down to sort of like 50-50. Still effectively the same amount of people are going to die. It's just now split across 2 kingdoms. So there is a need to fix things in Durin and help Catalyst as well. Viren comes up with the idea they can use dark magic. That if they kill a magma titan in Zadia and use its like core, they can heat up the land and make the harvest, more successful, and this will save all of these people. So the question is like, is it okay to sacrifice this one magical creature to save this many people? And everyone except Queen Sarai seems to be relatively okay with this. She makes some interesting points about like, does it have a family? Is it the last of its kind? Like, just coming up with all these like logical questions of like, in a way, she could accept it a little bit more if there was hundreds of them. If they were known to, in a way, just be nothing but monsters. But the idea seems to more be that it potentially is one of the last of its kind, and it is an intelligent kind of creature, even if it comes across as being a monster. But ultimately, she does support Harrow on this because it is to try and save multiple kingdoms. And so the fight against the magma titan is quite interesting. We see that, soldiers do die. They eventually manage to kill it and take its heart. But Thunder, the king of the dragons, does attack them on the way back. And there's a few key points that happen here. Like, again, they could have got back quicker if they left the wounded behind, but Harrow wouldn't have that. And again, it's Viren being pragmatic in all of this. And again, it's just gradually him building up this idea of feeling that if everyone just listened to me, everything would go very, very smoothly, but we'd also be becoming people that we don't really like. And so leaving all these people behind was not the right way to go. So there's a need to fend off the King of the Dragons. And so the two queens go back. And then this is a very interesting moment for Viren. He actually is basically, he could get away himself, but he decides to turn back and actually help the two queens by getting involved in the fight using magic himself. And of course, the whole idea is he's the only one who can use dark magic to actually solve this crisis. So this causes Sarai to come back and to save him. So we see the two queens die, and then of course on the way back, Sarai basically is killed as well, effectively to save Viren. And this is the kind of setup ahead of what is to come, which is the revenge for now this happening. And it's like, we killed the magma titan, the king of the dragons killed 3 queens and so on, and now this is the next stage of revenge, and it's just a cycle kind of going back and forth over and over again. And it's like, okay, there's an understandable aspect to this, but there's also that sense of like why Harrow was so annoyed with Viren, because of like, you're using dark magic to solve everything, and it seems to just cause more problems than it's worth a lot of the times. So that's interesting. But yeah, I think is that most everything. I'm looking through some episode descriptions here just to see if I kind of latch on to anything else. The whole Soren gets paralyzed plot actually is a bit interesting in that it comes a quite kind of surprising, shocking moment, but it is this turning point for Soren as a character, where he gets sort of like brought down to earth in all of this and is able to reflect on things in a kind of different way, and he's oddly accepting of it because like, oh, look at all this kind of bad stuff I did, and now I can't, let down that any more than this. It's very interesting, and the character is fundamentally kind of different going on past this point, if I remember what actually happens in book 3 correctly. So interesting stuff overall. But yeah, I think that's everything I do want to talk about from the book. The Callum Rayla relationship, there's a few teases of like things. I think it's one of those ones where like it definitely needs more time of those two alone, and this is another aspect of why Ezran going to become king is important, but it's obviously a lot of the book 3 stuff that actually really builds to it. You can tell Rayla is about to say that she potentially loves Callum. I think while he's in the fever dream and his breathing is starting to become ragged, so you can see that they've developed a connection to each other. It just it's not you don't fully, I think, lean in that direction just yet, but that's why they actually do quite good stuff in the coming episodes. So yeah, that they are my thoughts on book 2 Sky, and we will do book 3 Sun next week. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.